God of War Ascension is simultaneously the game I'd heard the least about, but also gave the lasting impression of being significantly worse than the rest of the series by a good margin. And after playing it, in some cases I do agree. It seems to make more significant changes to the overall gameplay than any game before it. Yet, simultaneously, it feels like the one that has most succumbed to the fatigue of the overall franchise. It could simply be that by the 6th outing of this franchise is too much without a major upheaval that 2018 gave, but other series like Call of Duty and even Assassin's Creed have been able to keep the same core gameplay for far more entries than this. I think the problem with Ascension is honestly a lot deeper than that. On the surface, the game is everything. The spectacle is impressive and memorable. It is a story that is relevant to Kratos' overall journey throughout these Greek games. It builds off God of War 3's very fluid and satisfying combat, and makes some true iterations, and in some cases, evolutions on that original formula. Ultimately, Ascension has two large problems. One is that in terms of gameplay, while it certainly adds things to the formula, it also takes away too much as well. And secondly, is that the story doesn't feel overly important. It makes the franchise feel like it's treading water instead of swimming forward. I'll only be talking about the single player for this game and not the multiplayer component, as I haven't played it and don't intend to. First is the combat, where there are several significant changes this game made. First and most notably, there's only one set of weapons. Throughout the other games, slowly but surely, we built up Kratos' arsenal of weaponry. The PSP games were limited to 2, but God of War 3, Kratos had 4 weapons to independently rely on. While sometimes they can be the illusion of choice, as many players, including myself, still like to rely on the classic blades, that illusion is important for creating motivation for the player. As well as, these weapons had clear, important reasoning for Kratos within the narrative. Thinking of his spear and shield gifted to him from his days as a warrior in Ghost of Sparta, or in God of War 3, the weapons being the spoils of war directly taken from foes and gods Kratos had defeated. They were a visual and practical reminder of the journeys Kratos had been on, and were intrinsic to the marriage between gameplay and story. Additional weapons do technically exist in this game. Kratos can pick up weapons such as discarded swords, shields, spears, and others. These weapons have a limited use on them, and also have different attacks that open up possibilities on different enemies. I found these not to be nearly as exciting or purposeful as the blades though, and largely stuck to the shield as a blocking mechanic. This is also similar for magic used within the game. The magic is based on elements related to the gods: fire for Ares, ice of Poseidon, the lightning of Zeus, and the souls of Hades, if you want to stretch it and call souls an element. The magic is embedded in Kratos' blade, and instead of having a singular, unique move, Kratos will switch the element and give him a range of moves based on that element. I overall really enjoy this system, as it gives more variety to some of the combinations Kratos can do, as they'll have different effects based on the elements, and in some cases completely different attacks. It also affects ranged magic attack as well, as the rage meter will be different. The variety it adds is great when it works. The issue is that these moves have to be slowly unlocked on each weapon, and having a maxed out fire, for example, is better than having a halfway unlocked lightning, which leaves this variety only really being useful near the end of the game. In fact, I only fully finished unlocking the last element, Souls of Hades, right before the final boss fight, where ultimately it wasn't that useful as it would have been on crowds of enemies. This element feature is really good when it works, but for me at least, it didn't come to fruition until the literal end of the game. The progression arc for this is just simply too slow. Having been able to upgrade them more often and earlier would have made the combat system significantly more engaging than it was. Secondly, magic suffers from similar issues as weaponry. While weapons in previous games had great story reasons, so too did magic. While magic's still here, unlike other weapons, its narrative importance is severely decreased. The closest to Ascension's system is the first God of War game, where the gods give Kratos the magic along his journey to take down Ares. This makes Kratos feel important and vilified in his ultimate quest, but also works more knowing the gods were simply using Kratos as a method to stop Ares. The issue with Ascension is that the powers seem to come fairly arbitrarily. Kratos dips his blades in the cauldrons and emerges with the powers. There's no real greater narrative purpose and makes the whole thing feel largely meaningless. The last notable change in the combat is the rage meter. While the rage meter in the original game slowly built up throughout the game, lasting a limited amount of time, Kratos would be somewhat invulnerable and his attacks would hit harder. Here it's more of a combo counter that goes up every time Kratos hits and goes down every time he gets hit, with the attack being directly connected to the elements. For example, if it's on ice, it freezes the person. It's more engaging and it's a way to reward more for a combo, but at the same time doesn't feel as useful when it's filled up. While this game tries to introduce a lot of changes in its combat scenario, I don't think it actually improves any of the combat scenarios itself, and makes all the innovation that this game brought feel largely redundant. I feel puzzles are an element of this game that, at least on the surface, are a significant step up. It takes, for example, the time slow mechanic from God of War 2 and evolves systems like that thoroughly with other magically imbued items. The first and most interesting of these is the Amulet of Ouroboros, which Kratos gains from Castor and Pollux after defeating them. It's very useful and allows structures to be both healed and decayed, such as if there was once a walkway to get to the other side, but has been broken, it can be replaced. And if there is something blocking the passage, it can be broken to allow Kratos through. The second is the O Stone of Orcos, which Kratos gains as a gift from Orcos. It allows Kratos to create a shadow of himself. This in puzzles is mostly used, such as carrying bodies and placing them on pressure plates used to in previous games. Kratos instead creates a copy of himself to do it. It's also useful in combat, as it will absorb attacks from enemies and distract them. The last of these items is the Eyes of Truth. These are able to break through the Fury's illusions and see the truth. They're only really useful in the last section of the game, and mainly in a narrative purpose. While Ascension introduces a lot of great mechanics for the puzzles, I don't feel like it really does much interesting things with them. Healing and decaying things is very straightforward, and the only time it required trial and error was on the water wheel. The copy of Kratos is also very straightforward, and really is just a returning mechanic that has been visually changed. And that's my whole issue with the puzzles in this game. They're skin deep. They appear different but don't really change all that much from the rest of the series, and I would argue are far simpler than the trilogy at least. The world here is still visually as beautiful as it ever has been. The opening fight taking place on the Titan, with temples built into it, was stunning, and a huge spectacle that is also completely matched by the mechanical serpent. An interesting change here that really affected the gameplay was that there were no manual saves. In previous games, getting to a manual save point made all the fighting, puzzles and platforming that took place in between them feel really important, as there would be multiple sections to come back to if you had to leave. With the new autosave feature, I can stop wherever and whenever, and come back exactly where I left off. I like it for convenience sake, but it definitely reduces some of the impact that those save points used to have. Ascension begins with Kratos imprisoned by the Furies. The Furies act as servants of Ares and have captured him for his betrayal of the god of war. Of course, this being Kratos, he doesn't stay captured and fights his way free, finding Orcos, who betrays the Furies and chooses to ally with Kratos. Orcos is the son of Ares and the Furies queen. Orcos tells Kratos to seek the oracle Althea and get the answers of his freedoms from Ares' bond. Althea informs Kratos that killing the Furies is the only way to free his bond from Ares. So there we have it. A personal motivation for Kratos to kill the Furies, their capture and torture of him, and a practical motivation, the key to his freedom. Honestly, the rest of the story isn't that interesting. The narrative was the bedrock of these games, and while they're very simple, such as the first game Kratos needing to find Pandora's box to take down Ares, it introduced a cast of characters. Kratos, his family, Athena, Ares, and had well-known figures such as Poseidon, Zeus, and Hades make appearances. And while Kratos certainly has a personal vendetta against the Furies, it feels lessened as they really are just servants of Ares. His issues aren't particularly with the Furies but Ares himself, and we already know how that story plays out. It's good to see consequences of Kratos deserting his servitude of Ares, and it ultimately continues to reinforce Ares' bad, which we know and have dealt with. The game also has great moments, such as Kratos choosing to live in reality rather than an illusion of his family created by the Furies. After Kratos kills the Furies, a trick was played and Orcos was made at Kratos' Oathkeeper, meaning the only way to sever the bond with Ares is actually to kill Orcos. Orcos convinces Kratos to do this, and upon killing him, the memories of his murder of his own wife and child return, which were masked by that bond. This seeks to ask the question, if Kratos' memory of his family and the atrocities he committed to them was tied to his bond, why was he fueled to desert Ares if he was still bonded? The story largely feels inconsequential and redundant. It retreads old ground that it didn't need to, and I feel it ultimately doesn't add anything meaningful to either Kratos v Ares or Kratos v the gods. Ascension really tries to elevate and innovate but I feel loses a lot of what made especially the trilogy so great in the process. It's one step forward, two steps back. Ultimately, I feel this game really does deserve its moniker as the worst God of War game. So much of this game is forgettable, and its innovation is really skin deep. It still has highlights from the franchise, such as the combat is still based on the same fun system, but is ultimately lessened here, both by fatigue of this system and the changes they've made. Ascension isn't a bad game, it's just not nearly as good as the others in the series. The story ultimately feels redundant, and the gameplay formula is in need of a much bigger shake-up than given, and perhaps most importantly, Kratos needs agency again. With Ascension, my experience with the Greek saga of God of War has come to a close, and I'm really glad that I chose to play these in the order that I did. I was debating between release order or chronological, and I'm really glad I chose release in the end, and to separate it into two trilogies, the main trilogy and the spin-off trilogy. It makes the elements and evolutions in gameplay and story coincide, as well as the spin-offs are all based on my knowledge of the trilogy anyway. This has without a doubt become one of my favourite franchises, and I'm so deeply enamoured with the story of Kratos and this world, and I can't wait to see how my experience with these games affect my view of God of War 2018, one of my favourite games of all time, when I replay that next. Thank you so much for watching this video. I've had a great time playing through this franchise, and even as disappointing as Ascension could be, I still think it's overall a really solid game, and I'm really glad that I played all through them and know Kratos' entire journey. These videos have also been a lot of fun to make, and I'm so excited for the conclusion of this series with God of War 2018 and later in the year with Ragnarok, and hopefully we'll be making a video about that. If you like this video, please give it a like and let me know what your thoughts are on God of War Ascension in the comments. If you want to see more, please subscribe, and until then, cheers and have a good one.